Hi everyone, this is chapter 11 of Pride and Prejudice. Jane and Lizzie are still stuck at Netherfield. Jane's starting to feel better though from her cold. Chapter 11. When the ladies removed after dinner, Elizabeth ran up to her sister, and seeing her well guarded from cold, attended her into the drawing room, where she was welcomed by her two friends with many professions of pleasure. And Elizabeth had never seen them so agreeable as they were during the hour which passed before the gentlemen appeared. Their powers of conversation were considerable. They could describe an entertainment with accuracy, relate an anecdote with humor, and laugh at their acquaintance with spirit. But when the gentlemen entered, Jane was no longer the first object. Miss Bingley's eyes were instantly turned towards Darcy, and she had something to say to him before he had advanced many steps. He addressed himself directly to Miss Bennet with a polite congratulation. Mr. Hurst also made her a slight bow, and said he was very glad. But diffuseness and warmth remained for Bingley's salutation. He was full of joy and attention. The first half hour was spent in piling up the fire, lest she should suffer from the change of room, and she removed at his desire to the other side of the fireplace, that she might be farther from the door. He then sat down by her, and talked scarcely to anyone else. Elizabeth saw at work in the opposite corner, saw it all with great delight. When tea was over, Mr. Hurst reminded his sister-in-law of the card table, but in vain. She had obtained private intelligence that Mr. Darcy did not wish for cards, and Mr. Hurst soon found even his open petition rejected. She assured him that no one intended to play, and the silence of the whole party on the subject seemed to justify her. Mr. Hurst had therefore nothing to do but to stretch himself on one of the sofas and go to sleep. Darcy took up a book, Miss Bingley did the same, and Mrs. Hurst, principally occupied in playing with her bracelets and rings, joined now and then in her brother's conversation with Miss Bennet. Miss Bingley's attention was quite as much engaged in watching Mr. Darcy's progress through his book as in reading her own, and she was perpetually either making some inquiry or looking at his page. She could not win him, however, to any conversation. He merely answered her question and read on. At length, quite exhausted by the attempt to be amused with her own book, which she had only chosen because it was a second volume of his, she gave a great yawn and said, "How pleasant it is to spend an evening in this way! I declare, after all, there is no enjoyment like reading. How much sooner one tires of anything than of a book. When I have a house of my own, I shall be miserable if I have not an excellent library." This is a pretty often quoted Jane Austen line. What people don't always realize, though, is that Caroline's not really being sincere when she says this. She's only trying to get Mr. Darcy's attention. We know that he enjoys reading, and that he's also spent a great deal of time and effort building up his family library at Pemberley. So she's just trying to get his attention and to also divert him from reading his book. She just wants him to talk to her. No one made any reply. She then yawned again, threw aside her book, and cast her eyes round the room in quest of some amusement, when hearing her brother mentioning a ball to Miss Bennet, she turned suddenly towards him and said, "By the by, Charles, are you really serious in meditating a dance at Netherfield? I would advise you, before you determine on it, to consult the wishes of the present party. I am much mistaken if there are not some among us to whom a ball would be rather a punishment than a pleasure." So Caroline says, "Really think about this ball thing, Mr. Bingley. I don't know if we really want to do this. It may not be fun for everyone here." "If you mean Darcy," cried her brother, "he may go to bed if he chooses before it begins. But as for the ball, it is quite a settled thing. And as soon as Nicholas has made white soup enough, I shall send round my cards." So Charles Bingley just says, "Oh, well, the ball is happening anyway, and if you mean that Darcy's not going to enjoy it, then he can just go to sleep before it happens." He's being, again, kind of joking around. "I should like balls infinitely better," she replied, "if they were carried on in a different manner. But there is something insufferably tedious in the usual process of such a meeting. It would surely be much more rational if conversation, instead of dancing, made the order of the day." "Much more rational, my dear Caroline, I dare say, but it would not be near so much like a ball." Miss Bingley made no answer, and soon afterwards got up and walked about the room. Her figure was elegant, and she walked well, but Darcy, at whom it was all aimed, was still inflexibly studious. In the desperation of her feelings, she resolved on one effort more, and turning to Elizabeth, said, "Miss Eliza Bennet, let me persuade you to follow my example, and take a turn about the room. I assure you it is very refreshing after sitting so long in one attitude." Elizabeth was surprised, but agreed to it immediately. Miss Bingley succeeded no less in the real object of her civility. Mr. Darcy looked up. He was as much awake to the novelty of attention in that quarter as Elizabeth herself could be, and unconsciously closed his book. He was directly invited to join their party, but he declined it, observing that he could imagine but two motives for their choosing to walk up and down the room together, with either of which motives his joining them would interfere. What could he mean? She was dying to know what could be his meaning, and asked Elizabeth whether she could at all understand him. Not at all, was her answer, but depend upon it, he means to be severe on us, and our surest way of disappointing him will be to ask nothing about it. So, Caroline and Elizabeth take a walk around the room. Caroline wants to get Mr. Darcy's attention. She only does because she asks Elizabeth to walk with her. She invites Mr. Darcy to walk with the two of them, and he says, no, by walking together you can only have two possible intentions, and walking with you would ruin either purpose. Caroline says, oh my gosh, you know what he means, Elizabeth. Elizabeth says he's probably going to say something sarcastic or mean again, so our best way would be to just not ask him any questions that would disappoint his chance to be nasty. Or to be teasing, rather. Miss Bingley, however, was incapable of disappointing Mr. Darcy in anything, and persevered, therefore, in requiring an explanation of his two motives. I have not the smallest objection to explaining them, said he, as soon as she allowed him to speak. You either choose this method of passing the evening because you are in each other's confidence, and have secret affairs to discuss, or because you are conscious that your figures appear to the greatest advantage in walking. If the first, I should be completely in your way, and if the second, I can admire you much better as I sit by the fire. So he says, your one purpose in walking around together could be that you're sharing a secret, and then I would just be ruining the secret by walking with you. Your second purpose would be that you want me to look at the way you walk and admire how you look, and I can see you better from where I'm sitting. Oh, shocking, cried Miss Bingley. I never heard anything so abominable. How shall we punish him for such a speech? Nothing so easy if you have but the inclination, said Elizabeth. We can all plague and punish one another. Tease him, laugh at him, imitate as you are. You must know how it is to be done. So Elizabeth says, if you want to really tease him or get back at him, you know him better than I do. You must know a better strategy. But upon my honor, I do not. I do assure you that my intimacy has not yet taught me that. Tease calmness of temper and presence of mind. No, I feel he may defy us there. And as to laughter, we will not expose ourselves, if you please, by attempting to laugh without a subject. Mr. Darcy may hug himself. Mr. Darcy is not to be laughed at, cried Elizabeth. That is an uncommon advantage, and uncommon I hope it will continue. For it would be a great loss to me to have many such acquaintance. I dearly love a laugh. So Caroline says, Mr. Darcy is too serious to be mocked or teased or made fun of. And Elizabeth says, well, that sounds very difficult. I couldn't have too many friends like that because I do really like to laugh and enjoy myself. Miss Bingley, said he, has given me credit for more than can be. The wisest and best of men, nay, the wisest and best of their actions, may be rendered ridiculous by a person whose first object in life is a joke. So Mr. Darcy says, anyone can be laughed at. Caroline Bingley is going too far, exaggerating. Certainly, replied Elizabeth, there are such people, but I hope I am not one of them. I hope I never ridicule what is wise or good. Follies and nonsense, whims and inconsistencies do divert me, I own, and I laugh at them whenever I can. But these, I suppose, are precisely what you are without. Perhaps that is not possible for anyone, but it has been the study of my life to avoid those weaknesses which often expose a strong understanding to ridicule, such as vanity and pride. Yes, vanity is a weakness indeed, but pride, where there is a real superiority of mind, pride will always be under good regulation. Elizabeth turned away to hide a smile. So Elizabeth and Darcy are going back and forth about this idea of, can you laugh at everyone? Should people be laughed at? Mr. Darcy says, I try not to do anything that may cause someone to ridicule, tease, or make fun of me. And Elizabeth kind of slyly says, right, yeah, you avoid being vain or prideful. And he says, vanity is not okay. So being self-absorbed is not good. But pride, where there's real superiority of mind, so if someone is truly noble and intelligent and wise, pride is not a bad thing. It's good to be proud of the person you are. And then Elizabeth thinks that's kind of funny, so she has to really hide her smile and not laugh at him. "Your examination of Mr. Darcy is over, I presume," said Miss Bingley, "and pray what is the result?" "I am perfectly convinced by it that Mr. Darcy has no defect. He owns himself without disguise." So Caroline says, "Oh, so now you've investigated him. What did you find out about Mr. Darcy?" And Elizabeth says, he has no flaws. She just doesn't want to get into an argument, most likely. "No," said Darcy, "I have made no such pretension. I have faults enough, but they are not, I hope, of understanding. My temper I dare not vouch for. It is, I believe, too little yielding. Certainly too little for the convenience of the world. I cannot forget the follies and vices of others so soon as I ought, nor their offences against myself. My feelings are not puffed about with every attempt to move them. My temper would perhaps be called resentful. My good opinion once lost is lost forever." "That is a failing indeed," cried Elizabeth. "Implacable resentment is a shade in a character. But you have chosen your fault well. I really cannot laugh at it. You are safe from me." So Darcy says, I'm not perfect. I do have some flaws. He mentions a few pretty significant ones. His temper, so he may get angry. He says it's too little yielding, so he is not going to change the course of his anger. If he's angered about something, he's going to stay angry about it. He can't forget the follies and vices of others, so he'll remember silly, ridiculous things that people do, or evil or serious flaws that someone has. He won't just brush those off. His feelings are not puffed about with every attempt to move them. So he's very decided once he makes up his mind in something. And his good opinion once lost is lost forever. So if he loses respect or approval of someone, he's never going to be able to forgive that person or to think of them in a respectful way again. And Elizabeth says that is a flaw, but I can't make fun of it. So this is now Mr. Darcy talking. "There is, I believe, in every disposition a tendency to some particular evil, a natural defect, which not even the best education can overcome. And your defect is a propensity to hate everybody. And yours," he replied with a smile, "is willfully to misunderstand them." "Do let us have a little music," cried Miss Bingley, tired of a conversation in which she had no share. "Louisa, you will not mind my waking Mr. Hurst?" Her sister made not the smallest objection, and the pianoforte was opened, and Darcy, after a few moments' recollection, was not sorry for it. He began to feel the danger of paying Elizabeth too much attention. So they have a pretty, it's still a kind of light conversation, but they talk about some pretty serious character flaws and important characteristics of each other. So Elizabeth mentions that Mr. Darcy, has a propensity, so he has a likelihood or an inclination to hate everyone. And Mr. Darcy doesn't deny it, but he says you willfully, so you on purpose misunderstand people. So he's saying, I think you've skewed what I've said, and he may be suggesting that he doesn't hate everyone, but that once he loses respect for someone, that they're not going to be able to change his mind. And then at the end of the chapter, we get some foreshadowing that Mr. Darcy, some foreshadowing that there may be something going on with Darcy liking Elizabeth in the future, but we also know that he's concerned about paying Elizabeth too much attention, so he's beginning to really like her. And that's the end of chapter 11.